What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Tuesday, August 31st.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, we have a 13-game slate tonight. Now, we've kind of been in a little slump with our batters. We've been nailing our pitcher picks, but the batters have been kind of sporadic. We've nailed like one or two batters on these slates that score a bunch of points. And the rest of these guys been scoring 0, 3, 6. So I want to get back on track with the batter picks here in this video tonight. So let's get into it. At the pitcher position, I like Brandon Woodruff with a 2% pitching advantage over the San Francisco Giants. Brandon Woodruff, he pitches his best ball versus lefty batters, only giving up a .524 OPS versus lefties, and he's facing 6 lefties here tonight. On top of that, the Giants have only hit 7 of his last 46 pitches. That's a 152 batting average. Brandon Woodruff is $10,600 FanDuel salary. He's $1,200 less on DraftKings, projected at 38.9 fantasy points here tonight. He has an ERA of 2.38. His record is 8-7 on the season, pitching an average of 95 pitches per game, averaging 39 fantasy points per game. He scored 58, 9, and 18 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks this is going to be a low-scoring game. 7.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Brandon Woodruff here versus the San Francisco Giants. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I like Yuli Gurriel with a 51% batting advantage over Yusei Kikuchi. Yuli Gurriel is batting 24% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .906 OPS versus lefties, and Yusei Kikuchi, he throws his worst ball versus righty batters, 27% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .756 OPS versus righties. Now, Yuli Gurriel is 4 for 17, batting a .235 batting average, but he has a .963 OPS versus Kikuchi because 2 of those 4 hits were for home runs. Then he's got a double in there. So Yuli Gurriel is $3,400 FanDuel salary, $2,000 more on DraftKings. So I like that FanDuel price, and he's projected at 8.7 fantasy points here tonight. The projection looks a little bit low. I'd put him at about 10 fantasy points for his average tonight. And he's averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 12, 0, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Yuli Gurriel here versus Yusei Kikuchi. Now I also like Miguel Sano with a 42% batting advantage over Zach Davies. Miguel Sano is batting 22% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .808 OPS versus righties, and Zach Davies, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 20% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .789 OPS versus righties. Miguel Sano is 3 for 5, batting .600 with a 1.467 OPS versus Davies. He's $3,300 FanDuel salary, and he's only $300 more on DraftKings. So I like that DraftKings price. He's projected at 10.7 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 25, and 22 fantasy points in his last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Miguel Sano here versus Zach Davies. I also like Jared Walsh with a 31% batting advantage over Jameson Taillon. Jared Walsh is batting 34% better versus righty pitchers, batting a 1.015 OPS versus righties. And Jameson Taillon, he's giving up a .720 OPS versus lefties. Now, Jared Walsh is 0 for 3 versus Taillon, but the splits are good, and he's $3,100 FanDuel salary and $1,100 more on DraftKings, so I like that FanDuel price. He's projected at 14.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 41, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Jared Walsh here versus Jameson Taillon. And you know what? I just caught this value play out of the corner of my eye. Take a look at Bobby Dalbec with a 25% batting advantage over Ryan Yarbrough. Bobby Dalbec is batting 12% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .933 OPS versus lefties. And Ryan Yarbrough, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, giving up a .762 OPS versus righties. Bobby Dalbec is 2 for 6, batting a .333 batting average and a 1.166 OPS versus Yarbrough. Bobby Dalbec is only $2,400 FanDuel salary, only $700 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season, but he's been on fire, scoring 22, 22, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Bobby Dalbec here versus Ryan Yarbrough. Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. Now, we picked this guy yesterday, and he was a dud, but he's in a great spot here tonight, so I'm going right back to him. I like Jean Segura with a 35% batting advantage over Patrick Corbin. Jean Segura is batting 12% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .850 OPS versus lefties. And Patrick Corbin, he throws 24% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .880 OPS versus righties. Now, Jean Segura is 10 for 35, batting a .286 batting average and a .771 OPS versus Corbin. He's $3,200 FanDuel salary, $1,700 more on DraftKings, so I like that FanDuel price. And he's projected at 10.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 15, and 28 fantasy points in his last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game, so I like Jean Segura here versus Patrick Corbin.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, now here's a value play. I like Josh Harrison with a 47% batting advantage over Tarek Skubal. Josh Harrison is batting 10% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .831 OPS versus lefties. And Tarek Skubal, he pitches 37% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .833 OPS versus righties. Now, there's no at-bats versus Skubal yet, but I like this pick because Josh Harrison is only $2,700 FanDuel salary. He's $900 more on DraftKings, projected at 8.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 0, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Josh Harrison here versus Tarek Skubal. Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. I like Josh Donaldson with a 33% batting advantage over Zach Davies. Josh Donaldson is batting 13% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .860 OPS versus righties, and Zach Davies, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 20% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .789 OPS versus righties. There's no at-bats versus Davies yet, and Josh Donaldson is $3,200 FanDuel salary, $700 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 28, 6, and 16 fantasy points in his last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Josh Donaldson here versus Zach Davies. Now I also like Alex Bregman with a 57% batting advantage over Yusei Kikuchi. Alex Bregman is batting 30% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .974 OPS versus lefties. And Yusei Kikuchi, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 27% worse than his pitch to lefties, giving up a .756 OPS versus righties. Now I like this pick because Alex Bregman is 5 for 13, batting a .385 batting average and a 1.346 OPS versus Kikuchi. He's $3,600 FanDuel salary, $1,500 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 9, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Alex Bregman here versus Yusei Kikuchi. Okay, let's take a look at the shortstop position. I got a stud pick for you. I like Fernando Tatis Jr. with a 23% batting advantage over Zach Gallen. Fernando Tatis Jr. is batting 18% better versus righty pitchers, batting a 1.013 OPS versus righties, and Zach Gallen is giving up a .691 OPS versus righties. Now, Tatis Jr. is 3 for 7 with a .429 batting average and a 1.985 OPS versus Gallen. 2 of those 3 hits were for home runs, and the other one was a double. He's $4,300 FanDuel salary, $1,900 more on DraftKings, projected at 12.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 16 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 35, 3, and 9 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Fernando Tatis Jr. here versus Zach Gallen. Now, Bo Bichette is also in a good spot if you want to come down and save a little money off of Fernando Tatis Jr. But the shortstop that I really like on this slate, none other than Xander Bogaerts with a 25% batting advantage over Ryan Yarbrough. Xander Bogaerts is batting 12% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .938 OPS versus lefties. And Ryan Yarbrough, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 13% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .762 OPS versus righties. And I like this pick because Xander Bogaerts is 11 for 27, batting a .407 batting average and a 1.037 OPS versus Yarbrough, and that's a pretty big sample size. He's $4,000 FanDuel salary, $1,800 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 6, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I think he's due for a big game here tonight. So I like Xander Bogaerts here versus Ryan Yarbrough. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. Another one of my favorite picks of the slate. Take a look at JD Martinez with a 6% batting advantage over that same pitcher, Ryan Yarbrough. JD Martinez is batting a .731 OPS versus lefties, and we know Ryan Yarbrough pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, giving up a .762 OPS versus righties. So the splits aren't fantastic here, But JD Martinez, the reason I like this pick is because he's 12 for 21, batting a .571 batting average and a 1.752 OPS versus Yarborough. So if you can stack in JD Martinez and Xander Bogaerts, I think that would be a nice stack here versus Ryan Yarborough. And Martinez is $3,800 FanDuel salary, $1,200 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 13, and 35 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like JD Martinez here versus Ryan Yarborough. I also like Raphael Ortega with a 58% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, John Gant. Raphael Ortega is batting 75% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .943 OPS versus righties, and John Gant is giving up a .451 OPS versus lefties, but those OPS numbers are going to balance out as he gets more pitches under his belt. Raphael Ortega is 0 for 1 versus Gant, and he's $3,400 FanDuel salary, only $700 more on DraftKings, projected at 12.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 32, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game, so I like Raphael Ortega here versus John Gant. Now I also like Teoscar Hernandez with a 33% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Keegan Aiken. Teoscar Hernandez is batting 18% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a 1.021 OPS versus lefties. And Keegan Aiken, he's pitching 14% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .839 OPS versus righties. Teoscar Hernandez is 2 for 4, batting .500 with a 2 OPS versus Aiken. One of those hits is a home run, and the other one is a double. He's $3,700 FanDuel salary, $900 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 13, 0, and 0 fantasy points in his last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. So I like Teoscar Hernandez here versus Keegan Aiken.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.